Howdy y'all, Mr. Cutchin back here for yet another video for my guitar students out there watching at home. Today we're going to be talking all about chords again. So in the past few videos we've covered some basic chord shapes and got you up and running with some of the chords that you're going to need to play songs. And now we're actually going to put chords together in a certain order. And when we do that, we're going to end up with something we like to call chord progressions. We're going to talk about two basic chord progressions, one in a major key and one in a minor key. If the idea of major and minor is still fuzzy to you, make sure you go back and watch the previous video where I talked about minor scales because I explained a little bit of the difference between a major key and a minor key there. So, two chord progressions to worry about. We're going to talk first about what exactly chord progressions are, what they're used for, and then we're going to put everything into context. We're going to learn chord progressions that will go with some of the songs that we've already started learning in class. So you'll already be familiar with the melodies, and then the chords will just be a new element that we're going to drop on top of all that. So let's start first by talking about chord progressions and what they are. So that's a two-part phrase. It's got two words in there. And the first word, chord, hopefully is becoming more familiar to you and you're starting to understand what exactly that is. The way I think about it is that a chord is basically multiple notes played at the same time, and it sounds a certain way. So a major chord like G major has a very specific sound. A minor chord like E minor has another specific sound. And that's pretty much it. Chords have usually at least 3 notes in them, but not always. They can have only 2, and they can have definitely more than 3. But the basic chords we've started learning have at least 3 different notes in them. Chords are what we use oftentimes on the guitar to accompany our own singing. And oftentimes you'll hear people play chords and do cool strumming patterns with the right hand. So everything there, that's all my chords. Now, the second part of the phrase, the word progressions, that word implies, it comes from the root word progress, or to progress. And what that implies is that we're going to be moving, not always necessarily moving forward, but we're going to be moving through the same sequence of chords. So a chord progression, this is very important, a chord progression is almost always repetitive. So it will happen multiple times in a song, which is great for memorizing because you'll go through it several times whenever you play a song, and that's going to help you commit it to memory, and especially commit it to muscle memory on the instrument. So chord progressions are repetitive. Oftentimes, they will come in sets of at least 4 chords. So it's very common to have a 4-chord progression, or even an 8-chord progression, all the way up to a 16 or even a 32-chord progression. But we're going to start basic and start with 4-chord progressions. And then, like I said at the beginning of the video, we've got 1 major chord progression and 1 minor chord progression to talk about. I'm going to start with the major chord progression. And just so you're aware, this chord progression I'm going to teach you is meant to go along with the song Faded that we started learning in class. I'm going to play the melody to Faded real quick. I'm not going to explain where the notes are on the fretboard or anything like that, but I've posted the tablature for Faded in the files section of Blend. So if you don't remember how to play this melody yet, make sure you go to the files section of Blend, get that tablature, and play through those notes so you can familiarize yourself with it. So real quick, just for review, here's the melody for Faded. There we have it. It's the same thing played 2 times. So there is a 4-chord progression that goes along with that song. And the 4 chords are as follows. And make sure you pay attention to the order that I play them in, because the order is important. It's going to always be the same. The very first chord I play is E minor. E minor. This is probably, I think, the very first chord that I taught you. It's super simple. middle and ring fingers on the 2nd fret, A string, 2nd fret, D string, everything else is open. E minor. Okay, the next chord after E minor is C major. C major has a very distinct chord shape where the fingers run diagonal across the fretboard. C major. And then chord number 3 is G major. G major. This one's a little tricky because we got to get our pinky finger down on the high E string up there. Then the last chord, number 4, is D major. D major is another distinct shape where your fingers are going to make this triangle between the 2nd and the 3rd frets. D major. Let me play them one after the other without stopping. We have E minor, C major, G major, D major. Perhaps that chord progression might even sound a little familiar to some of y'all, and that's because this chord progression is incredibly common throughout all genres of music, pop and rock, and everything else. You're going to encounter this chord progression all over the place. Next, I'm going to play it again, and I'm going to sing the melody for Faded, so you can hear how the melody fits in with the notes of the chords. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. Dum, da, da, dee, da, 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 So it's 4 chords, and I'm playing the same thing 2 times, so there's a repeat in there. Now, there is an extra layer of information that I want to put on this chord progression. And in order to do that, we're going to have to talk about numbers. We're going to have to assign every chord a number. And I don't mean numbers in terms of the order, because I said that E minor was first, and C major was second, G major was third, and D major was fourth. Forget about those numbers for now. That's different. We're going to be talking about these numbers as they relate to the key of the song. So I'll go ahead and tell you the song Faded, as the version that we've learned, is in the key of G major. And what that means is that in the key of G major, the chord G major, which has the same name as the key, is our home base. This is the chord that is going to feel the most settled when we get to it, okay? G major. The notes for the G major scale are going to fit with this song and with this key. So G major scale, those are basically all the notes that we need to be able to play Faded. So we're going to use the notes of the G major scale to assign numbers to all of the chords. Okay? Let's start with our home base chord G major. In the key of G major, the chord G major is the 1 chord. And the reason why is because G is the first note of the G major scale. That sounds very redundant and perhaps obvious to some of you, but we need to make it clear that the G major chord in the key of G major is what we call the 1 chord. Even though this chord is technically the 3rd one that we play, it has a specific number that's assigned to it, and that number is 1. Okay, so now let's go back to the very first chord that we play in the chord progression, which is E minor. So let's figure out what number we're going to assign E minor. So in order to do this, we're going to find the number we're going to play through the G major scale, and we're going to count until we get to the note E. So we're going to start by playing G, and that's 1. Next is A, which is 2. B is 3. C is 4. D is 5. E is 6. Okay, so E is the 6th note of the G major scale. Because E is the 6th note of the G major scale, we're going to say that E minor is the minor 6th chord of G major. So we're basically just establishing some relationships right now. So G major is the major 1 chord in the key of G major, but E minor is the minor 6 chord. And notice how I'm saying, before the number, I'm saying either major or minor, and that's just to let you know what type of chord to play. We want to make sure that we're playing G major and not G minor, and we want to make sure that we're playing E minor and not E major, because those will sound different. So we have G major is the 1 chord, E minor is the 6 chord, the minor 6 chord. So we have 2 more chords to assign numbers to for the chord progression in faded, and we're going to go next to C major. Same process as before. We're going to figure out what number in the scale the note C is. So we're going to start on G, 1, A, 2, B, 3, C, 4. There we go. C is the 4th note of the G major scale, which means that C major is the 4 chord in the key of G major. And it's not just any old 4 chord, it's the major 4 chord, because we are playing C major. Last but not least, we've got the chord D major to worry about. Let's take a little shortcut here. So we just said that the note C is the 4th note of the G major scale. What comes after C in the music alphabet? Well, it's the note D. So if D is directly after C, then that must mean that the D major chord is 1 number higher than the C major chord. The C major chord is the major 4 chord, so the D major chord must be the major 5 chord. It's 1 more than 4. And in fact, that is true. The D major chord in the key of G major is the major 5 chord. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is play the chord progression for faded, but I'm going to use the chord numbers instead of the chord names. So I'm going to say minor 6, major 4, major 1, major 5. One more time. Minor 6, major 4, major 1. Major 5. So you might be wondering, what is the whole point of assigning these random numbers to these chords? Well, the whole point is that the key of a song can be changed really anytime we want. Sometimes we'll change the key of the song to fit different instruments better. Sometimes we'll change the key of a song to fit different voices better, because some of us can sing higher than others or lower than others. So the key of a song is flexible. When you learn a song in one key, that doesn't mean that you'll always play that song in that key forever. We should challenge ourselves to learn the same song in different keys. So let's take a song like Faded, which so far we've learned in the key of G major, and instead, let's take it to the key of C major. So now we're in the key of C major, which means that the chord C major is no longer the major 4 chord. Instead, it is now the major 1 chord, because like I said, the 1 chord always has the same name as the key. Key of C major, chord C major equals 1. So this is now our home base. So we know that the chord progression for faded starts with minor 6, but 6 is no longer E in the key of C. In fact, I can get to E very quickly. It's just 3 notes away. So the note E in the key of C major actually represents the 3 chord, which we're not going to talk about. So let's figure out what our 6 chord is in C major. We're going to have C, D, E, F, G, A. And if you're counting along, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now my 6th chord, my minor 6 chord, is now A minor, because A is the 6th note of the C major scale. Now we have a minor 6, A minor. We have major 1. We have major 1, C major, but we're missing the major 4 and the major 5. So let's figure out what those chords are. From the starting on C again, we have C, D, E, F is 4. So F major, which don't worry about this chord shape yet, we haven't learned this one. F major is the major 4 chord in the key of C. Lastly, going 1 up from F, we get the note G. So the major 5 chord is G major in the key of C. So the chord progression for faded in the key of C major is now A minor, F major, C major, G major. But what's important is that the relationship did not change. It's still minor 6, major 4, major 1, major 5. We're just in a different key. And we can confirm this by singing the melody along, and you'll notice the song will sound basically the same, just it's in a lower key right now. So we have dum da dee da 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 dee do do da da dee da da da. So hopefully you can still tell that that sounds very much like faded, that we've just moved to a different key. So the whole point of assigning those numbers to our chords and learning those relationships is that it allows us to be flexible and to play different songs or even the same song in different keys. And oftentimes when you look up versions of songs, say on Ultimate Guitar or MuseScore, you might find the song is in a different key than what you're used to. And that's okay. I would recommend trying to learn it in a new key and challenge yourselves. All right, so that was our major chord progression for the song Faded. Now, I said that we're gonna learn one more chord progression, and this one goes with a minor key. So let's talk about this one. We're gonna start, this song is in the key of A minor. So now our home base is actually a minor chord, it's A minor. So we're gonna call this one the minor 1. Next up, we're gonna go to the minor 4 chord. So let's think, up from A, we have A1, B2, C3, D4. So D minor is the minor 4 chord in the key of A minor. D minor. Now we're gonna go back to minor 1. That's A minor. And then the last chord in this progression is gonna be the major 5. And we figure that out again by going up from A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the note E. So the major 5 chord in the key of A minor is the E major chord. E major. So I'll start by playing the chord progression and saying the chord names. We have A minor, D minor, A minor, E major. I'm going to play that again, and this time I'm going to use the chord numbers instead. So we have minor 1, minor 4, minor 1, major 5. Perhaps you recognize this song. Ay de mi llorona, llorona, right? Tú eres mi sunta. The song La Llorona. Unfortunately, this chord progression only works for the first half of the song. The middle section uses one extra chord that we haven't learned yet, so unfortunately we can't talk about that today. But stay tuned, because I definitely want to get us learning the full chord progression as early as next week. So that minor chord progression, minor 1, minor 4, minor 1, major 5, is also very common. It's very common in lots of styles of music to use a combination of the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord all together. Those are probably the most important chords you'll find in any key. So again, we could do the same exercise as earlier, where we can take the chord progression in La Llorona and we can move it to a different key. And just so you know, there's a special word that we use when we move songs into different keys, and that word is called transpose. So if you say, I'm going to transpose a song, what you're doing is changing the key from one to the other. So let's transpose La Llorona from A minor to D minor instead. So in D minor, the minor 1 chord is D minor. The minor 4 chord is D, E, F, G, G minor. And don't worry about how to play G minor yet, we haven't talked about it. So minor 4 in the key of D minor is G minor. Back to minor 1, D minor. And then now the 5 chord. A is the 5th note of D minor, so this is going to be A major. A major. So listen to the key one time, the chord progression in the key of D minor. I can still sing along with this one. That the song is now much lower in my voice, and in fact it's actually difficult for me to sing in this key. So this key doesn't work well for my voice, but it might work well for your voice, and it's just a matter of experimenting and figuring out what works best for you. So we covered a lot of information in this video. We talked about what a chord progression is. We talked about a basic major chord progression and a basic minor chord progression. And we also identified numbers that we can assign to the chords in a key. And when we assign those numbers, it allows us to transpose a song into a different key and quickly figure out what the chords are, because the relationship doesn't change. A minor 1 chord will always be a minor 1 chord. It just depends on whether you're in A minor or D minor or any other key, and that key will tell you what the minor 1 chord is. So I'm going to make sure to include some written information with this video in Blend. I'll write out the chord progressions, of course, and I'll also write out the numbers. And just so you're aware, I'm going to be writing the numbers in what we call Roman numeral notation. And maybe some of you have heard of or even written Roman numerals yourself. So basically the number 1 looks like the letter I, the number 2 looks like 2 I's, 3 is 3 I's, and then 4 is an I with a V after it, 5 is a V, and then 6 is a V with an I after it. And I'll basically put a little key on the document that will say, you know, number 1 equals Roman numeral 1, 2 equals 2, and so on. So you'll have a little way to translate. But Roman numerals are what we typically use to represent chord numbers, so we're going to start learning how to read them. All right, so this video has gotten long enough. I hope you enjoyed watching and found it to be useful. Feel free to message me on Blend or send me an email if you've got any questions or concerns. And I'd encourage you to stop into office hours sometime either tomorrow or next week just to check in, see how things are going. Thanks for watching again, and happy practicing.